A very good afternoon to all, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us in today's session. We have approximately about 700 participants at the moment, and we're waiting for more people to come in. So I'll ask everyone to kindly spend probably maybe about 5 minutes to wait for more people to join before we start. So it's about 4:05, and thank you so much for everyone for joining us in today's session. My name is Nicholas, and I'm the moderator for today's session. And welcome to the Elsevier Southeast Asia Publishing Workshop. Today will be an introduction to scholarly publishing, where we'll talk about the publications and manuscript preparation with an Elsevier chemistry editor as well as publisher. So in today's session, we have with us Professor Henk Buschke, who is a professor at the University Medical Center from the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, who has also been an editor of Colloids and Surfaces B for biointerfaces since 1992. Professor Henk Buschke is a full professor and is the head of the Department of the Biomedical Engineering at the W.J. Kolff Institute. His research includes physical chemistry of the interactions of biological components, the prevention of biomaterial-associated infections through surface modification, and he has published over 670 articles with an H index of 84. With us today and on your screen, you have with us Rob Van Dalen, who studied analytical chemistry and who is also a publisher in chemistry for more than 10 years. He is responsible for a portfolio of 14 journals in the fields of green, physical, and theoretical chemistry, which also includes the Chemical Physics Letters and the Journal of Colloid and Interfaces Science, together with 4 other titles in green chemistry. He is the initiator of the Green and Sustainable Chemistry Challenge for innovative green chemistry ideas so that they can apply this to local communities. So very welcome to have with us here Hank and Rob. And before we actually start and I yield the floor to them, let me walk you through the agenda that we have today. The first 1.5 hours, we'll be talking about the publication process, on how you can prepare for a manuscript, how you can communicate your research. We'll talk about research rigor and data accuracy, together with research and patents. The next and subsequent final half an hour will be a Q&A panel discussion. So I'll urge anyone who has any real dying questions to submit your questions in the Q&A box that you see on top of you. So from there, we'll select some questions, which we'll put in the Q&A session, where Hank and Rob will answer the questions. So some final housekeeping rules. If you have any questions, like I mentioned earlier, please ask questions using the Q&A feature in Zoom. We have with us our other customer consultants from Thailand, Kevlin, as well as Indonesia and Philippines, Johan. So if you have any questions in Thai or Bahasa Indonesia, or maybe Tagalog, please do so. The questions will be addressed after the presentation, and the materials and e-certificates will be provided after the webinar. If any of you have any problems with the audio, you can try refreshing or logging off and on again. So with this, I'll pass the floor over to you, Rob. Rob, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. So I'm very happy to be part of this author workshop. So first of all, greetings from a cold and rainy Amsterdam. It's about 12 degrees here, and later this week we will have hail, and it will be pretty cold. So I would rather be in Southeast Asia now. I've been a couple of times to Malaysia, Indonesia, and other countries in the area. Always love going there. So let's hope that we will be able to travel again soon, and that I can meet some of you in person and do these type of workshops in person. So let's get started with the workshop. So can everybody see my screen now? Nicholas, can you perhaps confirm?
Yes.
If you can see. Okay. Okay, then I'll get started. By the way, I had this before. Yeah, here we are. So I'm doing this workshop together with Henk Busker. I know Henk already for quite some time. He's a very good editor. Nicholas already did a short introduction about him, so I won't do that. I will just talk a little bit about the journal. So he's editor of College of Services B for almost 30 years now. And that journal has an impact factor of almost 4.4. So it's quite a good journal. It's mainly focused on biointerfaces in colloids. And it has about 2,800 submissions per year. And Henk is handling about 400 to 500 articles per year. So he has a huge experience as an editor and in handling articles. Henk has a meeting now at this moment, but he will join us from in an hour's time, and then he will share with us his perspective, his editor's perspective of what he thinks is important in a good article. And just to add a couple of things about myself, so I've been giving these workshops in the US, Europe, China, India, Southeast Asia many times before. So this is what we're going to talk about today, a little bit about Elsevier, then manuscript preparation, the publication process, ethics and reproducibility, research communication, and then it's up to Henk with the editor's view of how to prepare a good paper. So a bit about Elsevier. Elsevier has a long history in scientific publishing. The original house of Elsevier publishing house started in 1580 already. At the University of Leiden, it was a kind of university press. And many famous authors published with Elsevier, like Galileo Galilei. Here you see on this slide a picture of his book, and Erasmus Descartes, Alexander Fleming, and Jules Verne. So I heard that over 100 Nobel Prize winners published with Elsevier. Here you see an example from a journal that I do. This is Richard Ernst. The title is NMR Fourier Chromatography. So this is actually the article in NMR that led to the development of MRI. So the instrument that you have now in all major hospitals. So an essential discovery, and he got a Nobel Prize for that. Here's another nice article that we published also in one of my journals, Chemical Physics Letters. The author here is A. Merkel. So that's Angela Merkel. She's the prime minister of Germany, of course, and she used to be a chemist. So yeah, what I always say here, you know, if you want to change careers, if you don't want to pursue your career as a scientist or a chemist, there are always other possibilities. And this is also a nice example, I think, of what we published. So the authors here are Sergey Brin and Larry Page. And if you read the first line of the abstract, it says, in this paper, we present Google, a prototype of a large-scale search engine. So that's really the first article on Google, and that was published by Elsevier. Very cool, I think. So for my journals, so this is one of the journals that I do, Chemical Physics Letters, we discovered that only in this journal, 16 Nobel Prize winners published their groundbreaking work. So we made a special Nobel issue. We reprinted all the groundbreaking articles, and we asked all the Nobel Prize winners to write a historical perspective, and that was published together with their original article. It was a very nice issue. So Elsevier, well, it's the largest scientific publisher. We publish 26% of the world content, and over 1,000 English language research articles are published each day. So an enormous amount. So we have offices around the world, in Singapore, China, Australia, well, really all over the world. We work with 70,000 editors, 70,000 editorial board members, etc. We have 7,000 employees, 78 offices in 25 countries. And Elsevier is one of the most advanced publishers now. So we have Science Direct, our online platform. There's 60 million articles there with 1 billion downloads per year. So that's really an amazing amount. We have Scopus, the largest abstracting and indexing database with 64 million records from 5,000 publishers. We have SciVal, that's a research intelligence and analysis tool. So you can visualize the university's performance or look for inspiration to set up collaborations. And we have Reaccess, a chemical database with 125 million compounds and 53 million reactions. So we are very advanced. Well, you could say the most advanced, technically advanced publisher, but we also do a lot of other nice things. So for instance, in inclusion and diversity, just a couple of weeks ago, I read in the news that RELX, so that's the parent company of Elsevier, is the absolute global forerunner when it comes to inclusion of LGBTI people. So that's also in that aspect, which is not really directly related to science, perhaps. We are also one of the forerunners. But, you know, there's also a relation to science here. So also for inclusion and diversity, we also try to have that inclusion and diversity in the editors that we work with and in the editorial boards. Other activities that Elsevier is doing is, for instance, the Elsevier Foundation. That's a subsidiary of Elsevier. They get millions per year to spend on good causes, for instance, research in developing countries, diversity in STM, etc., etc. Elsevier is one of the starters of Research for Life, and in the Research for Life program, low-income countries can get content to our journals for free or at very low cost. And we do a lot of analysis. We publish analysis reports for free that are available online on Science Direct, for instance, on sustainability science, on gender in research, and disaster science. And we have a SDG resource center. You probably know the 17 SDGs that have been set up by the UN about 5 years ago. So we publish all our main content related to the 17 SDGs on this resource center, and they are made open access for free. So everybody can access the important content related to these 17 SDGs. So you can just go to this resource center, click on one of the SDGs in which you are interested, and then you see the relative content open access, so available to everybody. And what I'm doing, so I'm now lately very active in green and sustainable chemistry. So what Nicholas said, I'm started up the Green and Sustainable Chemistry Challenge. So that's a kind of contest. So people from all around the world send in proposals for that. It should be innovative green chemistry ideas that can be directly applied to local communities. And I always try to do a follow-up visit to the winners. So here you see me standing on the rice fields in Malaysia. So one of the first prize winners for this challenge, just to give you an example, what we're looking for here, was a lady from Malaysia, an assistant professor, and she won this prize for developing a biopesticide for rice fields. So people often ask me, so what are the developments in science? You know, what are the hot areas? So yeah, if I analyze that, I often look at really the major journals in science. So that's Nature and Science. And using Scopus and another tool that we have, I did a kind of term map to see where the most cited areas are. And you see a lot of bubbles here, but to explain it just in high level detail, the size of the bubble is the amount of papers in that area, and the color indicates the number of citations, the relative number of citations. So the blue dots are not cited very much, and the red dots are cited a lot. And you see really two areas here in research. On the left, you see T-cell, cancer, mouse. So that's all the research related to solving all kinds of cancer. So that's really a hot area in research, of course. And on the right-hand side, you see a lot of things related to energy. So these are really the two main areas, the hottest areas in research, I would say. Energy and SDG related topics, and research related to cancer. And if you look at so Nature and Science publish, of course, all kinds of research. But if you look at the top chemistry area, so I did this analysis with SciVal, you see indeed the top areas are related to energy. So battery technology, so that's the first entry. And by the way, in the second column from the right, you see the field-weighted citation impact. So that's the relative number of citations that these articles get. So with 2.03, that means that these articles that get on average twice as many citations as the normal articles in chemistry. So battery technology is very hot. Photocatalysis, solar cells, but also nanoscience, graphene, nanotubes, biocenters, so more the bio-related field. And further down, you see another bold area that's pharmaceutical preparation, drug discovery. So also probably related, the chemistry part related to cancer research. So let's now talk a little bit about manuscript preparation. So I will talk about the steps that you have to take before writing a paper, how to develop and submit an article, the overview of peer review process, what editors are looking for, how to deal with referee comments, and then ethics. So this is a nice article, I think. It was already published some time ago by one of our editors. He gave 10 tips of writing a truly terrible journal article. You know, sometimes tips of things what you should not do can be even more helpful than things that you should do. So try to avoid these things. So refuse to read the previous literature, take the lazy route and plagiarize, omit key article components, disrespect previous publications, overestimate your own contribution, excel in ambiguity and inconsistency, apply incorrect referencing, prefer subjective over objective statements, give little care to grammar, spelling, figures and tables, and ignore editor and reviewer comments. So don't do these things. So if you want to publish, so first determine if you're ready to publish. So ask yourself, do I have a story to tell? You know, editors and reviewers are looking for original and innovative research that will add to the knowledge in their field of science. So your conclusions must be sound based on uh, robust and good data. So you can also ask, do I have an audience to tell it to? So are people interested in your research? So the more original and innovative your research, the more people will be interested. And if you're ready to publish, a strong manuscript is what is needed next. So what is a strong manuscript? That is a manuscript that has a clear, useful and exciting message and presented and constructed in a logical manner so that reviewers and editors can grasp the significance of your article easily. So, you know, editors and reviewers are all busy people. They do this next to their normal academic work. So like Henk Busser, Henk is a professor at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. He has teaching responsibility, he is doing research himself. So he's doing this next to his academic duties. So they're all very busy people. So try to make things as clear and as easy as possible for them to save their time. Choosing the right journal, that's an important step in the publication process. So very often people go for the highest impact factor journal that I can find. That's not always the best solution, you know. If you publish your article in a journal that really is your target audience, then you may get more citations to that article than, for instance, if you would publish the article in Science or Nature. Because also in Science and Nature, there are a lot of articles that get 0 citations. So Elsevier can be of a little bit help here. We have developed a so-called journal finder tool. You can find it on our website. And with the finger engine technology, we can find a suitable journal for this or for you. You just have to enter your title, your abstract, and with that fingerprint tool, we can come up with suggestions. Of course, if you already have an idea what would be a good journal, you can also go directly to the journal homepage of that journal. And by the way, also if the journal finder suggests a journal to you, always go to the journal homepage and double check if the journal is suitable for that. Because on the journal homepage, you will find the journal aims and scope, the types of article that are accepted. You can have a look at the recently published articles. So are they more or less the same as yours? And, you know, references in your own article will often lead you to the correct journal. And of course, do not submit manuscripts to more than one journal at the same time. That's unethical, and that can lead to quite some problems. I will talk about that later. So what is a good process of writing a paper? Of course, start the process with things that you already have. Start with the figures and tables of your research, and then prepare a very first outline, a first draft of the article. So determine what the central message is, what is the research question that you want to answer with your article, and summarize the main findings and select some references. And then write a more detailed outline in your own style, quickly, without editing, and don't care too much about language quality. Don't think for hours and hours about the grammar of sentences. Just just write down your message in your own style. And then read the first draft, add notes, try to read it as a critical reader, not as the author, and ask yourself, is the message clear to any new readers? And then you start really the process of correcting the article. So rewriting and improving, revise the text, improve the order and the logic of the scientific content, identify any gaps and improve unclear parts, remove double and redundant text, and optimize the readability, correct language errors, and check if the text is consistent and coherent. Especially important when you have multiple authors on an article. And then try to get feedback from co-workers and colleagues. So language is a very important part in research. Sometimes people have done really good research, but if the article is has too many errors, language errors, the language is bad and incomprehensible, then despite the fact that you have good research, the article may be rejected. So language is important. So do publishers correct language? No, in general, publishers think it's the author's responsibility to make sure that the paper is in the best possible form submitted for publication. But publishers do provide resources. So for instance, we have Elsevier has a web shop where we offer translation services that cost about $300. That is a lot of money, but still, if you look at the total cost that is involved in your research, it's still a modest amount. So that this is not an Elsevier owned service. So we won't make any money with it, but it is Elsevier trusted. So we know that they do a good job. So they're all PhDs working for this, and they're based in the US, I believe. So they know about science and they know about language. But let me give you some guidelines for good language in your article. So very simple guidelines that can help to improve your article. So first of all, the use of tenses. In the abstract and summary, use the past tense because you describe what has already been done. In the introduction, use the present tense. You describe what you're going to do, materials and methods and results. The past tense, again, you describe what you have already done. And in the discussion, you can use both the past tense and the present tense because you discuss what you have already done, but you can also give an outlook to the future. So try to write with direct and short sentences. We're not writing literature here. This is scientific communication. So long sentences can confuse readers, but they can also confuse yourself. You can make more easily mistakes in long sentences than in short sentences. And short sentences also look more professional. So nowadays, the average length of sentences is about 12 till 17 words. And that's just a very rough indication. What is important is to have only one piece of information per sentence. So try to avoid long sentences with multiple statements. So try to say it simple. Use the most simple words that you can think of. So for instance, use instead of utilize, spending instead of expenditure, needs rather than necessity, and very often you can omit phrases like it has long been known that, it is interesting to know that, however, nevertheless, despite the fact that, all these things, they can very often be left out and the sentences can be made shorter. So here's an example of a clear sentence. We track the colonies of these honeybees to see how far they travel to food. Dot. The honeybees flew up to 25 meters. So very clear, eh? There's no question about it, what is meant here. And also because of the simplicity of the sentence, you avoid mistakes. So just a couple of examples to show you how you can simplify sentences. So removing unnecessary words. So the first example is they are actively addressing the problem and are in the process of planning a series of tutorials. A good sentence, but there are a couple of double things, actively addressing. If you're addressing something, that's already an activity, and in the process of, just leave that out. So the sentence could be they are addressing the problem and planning a series of tutorials. Next one, the speaker reminded us 3 different times of the fact that he has been studying nanoparticles for the past 15 years. Well, 3 different times, and of the fact that, so these are things that can be left out. So the sentence can become, the speaker reminded us 3 times that he has been studying nanoparticles for 15 years. Next example, I like that one. We estimated that as much as 12 till 18%, depending on the tissue, of interspecies differences in gene expression levels might be explained, at least in part, by changes in DNA methylation patterns. So this is a real example from a real article, and there is an awful lot of uncertainty here. 12 till 18%, that's already a range, and as much as, that adds to the uncertainty, and depending on, too many uncertainties, and you can make it much shorter. So the sentence could simply be, differences in DNA methylation could explain 12 to 80% of differences in gene expression. Much more clear, much less uncertainty, and, no mistakes. Punctuation is important, so check where you put your commas and dots. So there's a nice book about this. Eats, shoots, and leaves. So if you put the comma behind eats, then it means first eating, then shooting, and then leaving. But if you leave out the comma, it's eats, shoots, and leaves. So that's about a panda bear eating bamboo shoots. And there's, of course, a big difference between let's eat grandma and let's eat grandma. So, and below you see another example of wrong punctuation. So the erythrocytes, which are in the blood, contain hemoglobin. The sentence is wrong. The sentence implies that there are erythrocytes elsewhere that don't contain hemoglobin. So please pay attention to the punctuation, the commas and the dots that you place. I will now quickly go to all elements of an article and give you some guidelines. So starting with the title and ending with the references. So the title must be interesting, concise, and informative, and accurate for using in indexing systems. And people should be able to judge what your article is about by only reading the title. So nowadays, descriptive titles remain the norm, and here you see 2 examples of declarative and descriptive titles. So try to delete trivial phrases like notes on or a study of course it's a study, so leave that out. And titles that end with a question mark are not often accepted. So here are a couple of, again, real life examples of titles and how they have been improved. So just to give you an idea of, how possibly to improve your own titles. So this was the original title, Preliminary Observation of the Effect of Zinc Element on the Anti-Corrosion of Zinc Plating Layer. So what's going on here? So the title is really too long. The revised title became The Effect of Zinc on Anti-Corrosional Zinc Plating Layer. So, long titles can distract readers, so try to remove all redundancies such as studies on, nature of, etc. And never use expressions such as preliminary. Always be precise. Then another example, action of antibiotics on bacteria. Well, this is a little bit too short. That can deal with anything. So the revised title became Inhibition of Growth of Mycobacterium tuberculosis of Streptomycin. So titles should be specific. So think about, how will I search for this piece of information when you design the title? And then the third example, the fabrication of carbon CDS coaxial nanofibers displaying optical and electrical properties via electrospinning carbon. So the revised title, so the language is a little bit clumsy here. So the revised title became Electrospinning of Carbon CDS Coaxial Nanofibers with Optical and Electrical Properties. So the comment of the editor here was perhaps not so friendly, but he says, the English needs help. The title is nonsense. All materials have properties of all varieties. So he says, you could examine my hair for its electrical and optical properties. So you must be specific. So I hope that these examples may be a little bit helpful in designing your title. Then after the title, the authors. So there are some general principles for authors. So first of all, the corresponding author, that's the person who conducts and or supervises the data analysis and the proper presentation and interpretation of the results. He puts together the paper and submits the paper to the journal. And that person is the first contact point for the editor, the reviewers, and the publishers to discuss the paper. Co-authors are people that make truly intellectual contribution to the data analysis, the experiments, and contribute to the data interpretation. They review each draft of the paper and must be able to present and defend the results. So abuses that should be avoided in authors is ghost authors. So leaving out authors who should be included, and gift authors, including authors when they did not contribute significantly to the article. Then the abstract. The abstract is of course freely available in electronic abstracting and indexing services like PubMed, Medline, Embase, Scopus, etc. And you can see it as the advertisement of your article. So try to make it interesting and easy to be understood without reading the whole article. It must be accurate and specific, so describe what has been done. And a clear abstract will strongly influence whether or not your work is further considered, not only by the editor and the reviewers, but also by readers, So try to keep it as brief as possible. Also check the guide for authors. Sometimes there are length restrictions for the number of words that you can use, but always list the main findings and see it as your opportunity to sell your article. So from editors, let me drink some water. So I hope it's a little bit better now. So the main elements that should always be in an abstract are the hypothesis, what's the question that you want to answer, your main findings, and a conclusion. If you have these three elements in your abstract, it cannot go wrong. Then keywords, we can be very short about that. Just check the guide for authors, how many keywords that journal wants, if they have a thesaurus, etc. So yeah, check the guide for authors. Then the introduction. Introduction is an important part of your article because they provide context to convince readers that you clearly know that your work is useful. So try to be as brief as possible, but clearly address the following points. What is the problem that you are studying? What are your aims? What is your hypothesis? And what is the significance of your work? Always describe what has been done before. So try to do a balanced literature overview. Cite a couple of the main and important works. And, try to cite only recent and relevant work. So explain in the introduction, what did you do and with what did you achieve? And try to be consistent with the nature of the journal. Then the methods, also an easy section. So there should be enough detail that other people can repeat your experiment. But if you use very well established methods, just cite that method and do not explain that method in detail again. In the results section, you list what you have done, what you have found. So use clear figures and tables to summarize the text, and do not duplicate tables and figures in the text. And what I mean here is that uh, you, the figures and the tables already list all the data, so do not list all the data again in the description in the text. Just give a couple of main findings in the text, but do not duplicate the tables and the figures. So captions should be able to stand alone. So that is important. So very often with the online version of the article, people read the title, read the abstract, and if the abstract is interesting enough, they go to the figures and read the captions. So people should be able to know what's going on in a figure by only reading the caption and looking at the figure. And they should be forced to read the whole article to understand what's going on in a figure. And the data should be easy to interpret and well presented. Figures and tables are the driving force behind your publication and the most efficient way to present results. So pay good attention to that, make them as clear as possible. Don't make them, too crowded with, for instance, too many lines or too much information. Make them very clear and make them of good quality. Figures and tables are really very important. And one picture is worth 1,000 words. In the discussion section, you describe what the results actually mean. So that makes it a very important section because here you have a chance to sell your data. So of course, make the discussion correspond to the results and do not ignore work that is in disagreement with yours. Confront it and convince the reader that you are correct or better. And also discuss the limitations and implications of your results. And you always need to compare published results with yours. Probably you're not the very first person in the world that is doing this type of research. So compare what you have found with others. Place it into context. And in the conclusion, you can explain how your work advances the field of science from the present state of knowledge. So it should be clear, justify your work in the research field, and maybe suggest future experiments. So here's an example. So we have demonstrated that, blah, blah, blah. And based on these findings, etc., we assume that, and then, however, further studies are needed to determine this and this. So perfect conclusion. Then the references, of course, cite the main scientific publications on which your work is based. Do not use too many references. Also, again, check the guide for authors. Sometimes there's a restriction for the number of references. And what is important, always ensure that you have fully absorbed the material that you're referencing to and not just rely on checking experts and isolated sentences, So don't just copy a list of references from another publication or from a previous publications. And try to avoid excessive self-citations. Of course, you can cite your own work if you have done work in that field before, but not half of the references should be to your own work. And also try to avoid excessive citations and publications from the same region. Scientific research is worldwide, so also try to express that in your article. And check the guide for authors for the style of references. In the acknowledgements, you assure those who have helped you that those people are recognized. So there can be advisors, financial supporters, suppliers who may have given you material. Then a cover letter. So for a lot of journals, it's not mandatory, but still I would recommend to write a cover letter because it's your opportunity to communicate directly to an editor of the journal. So you can explain in your cover letter what makes your research important and special to the journal, why it should be published. And you can also note special requirements, reviewers that may be invited or certain conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest, we're going to talk about that later. So here's an example of a cover letter. So before you submit an article, check the manuscript as thoroughly as possible before submission and ask colleagues and supervisors to review your manuscript. Submit your manuscript with a cover letter and then wait for a response. So let's now talk a little bit about the publication process, but what happens after you are submitting an article. So let's first talk about the scientific publishing fundamentals. So what are publishers doing? So they take care of the registration of your article. So that's the timestamp, the official publication of the article in a journal, the certification of your article. So that's the peer review process to ensure the validity and integrity of the research. Dissemination, provide a platform where others can read it. So for us that's Science Direct. Preservation, so preserving the minutes of the record for the far future. So we store electronic copies of the articles around the world to make sure that they will be preserved for the future. So peer review, that's of course the essential filter to separate science from speculation and to determine the scientific quality. So it helps to determine the validity, significance, and originality of the research. And it helps to improve the quality of the papers. Sometimes comments from the reviewers can really help to improve your article. So publishers have been doing peer review for over 300 years. So they have set up the systems for peer review and they bear the costs for that. But it is important to note that publishers really stand outside the decision process. So if an editor decides to reject or accept an article, we won't interfere with that decision. So here you see the peer review process. So it starts on the top left-hand side with the author submitting a paper, goes to an editor. The editor checks if the basic requirements are met. Is the article complete? Is the language good? Is it of sufficient quality? Does it belong in this journal? If not, then it can be directly rejected. If yes, then the editor will assign reviewers. Those are external experts. They review the article, give their recommendation back to the editor, and based on that, the editor can either reject the article, accept it, or send, what very often happens, send it for revision back to the author, and then the cycle starts again. So, what are editors, what are we looking for in submissions? So we first check the the ethics aspect. So all articles, I will talk about that later. So all articles are automatically checked for plagiarism. So based on that automatic check, if there is enough plagiarism, too much plagiarism, too much copying from other articles, then the article can be rejected. The article will be checked if it is in scope for the journal, and if not, it can be suggested to transfer to another more suitable journal. The quality will be checked. If the quality is not enough, it may be transferred to another journal that has maybe slightly lower quality threshold. But if these 3 hurdles are taken, then it will be sent out for peer review. So if you get a revision back from the editor, it can be major or minor revision. Major revision means that the manuscript may finally be published in the journal, but there are significant deficiencies that must be corrected before acceptance. So that can even involve additional experiments. And minor revision means that, basically the article is worth of being published, but there are some elements that have to improve. And by the way, minor revision is not a guarantee that the article will be published. So really pay good attention to what the referees have said, what the editor has sent to you, and prepare a detailed response letter. Because if you are in this stage of getting published, you are very close to the actual publication of your article. And it would be a pity if you don't pay attention to this stage in the publication process, and that your article will be rejected because of that. So prepare a detailed response letter to the editor and copy and paste each review comment and type your response below it. So in that way, the editor can clearly see what you have done to answer the questions of the reviewers. So state specifically which changes you have made to the manuscript, include page lines and numbers if required. And do not use statements like comment accepted, discussion changed accordingly. Then nobody knows what you have done. So if you are not in agreement with the reviewer comments, that can of course happen. Reviewers, we are all human. So reviewers can also be wrong. So try to write a convincing, solid, and polite scientific rebuttal when you feel that the reviewer is wrong. So pay some attention to this in the last stage of being accepted. So if your article is accepted, very rare, but it happens. So congratulations, you can give cake to the department and then wait for the proofs to arrive. Very often articles are rejected. So the probability is 40 to 90% for some articles like journals like Cell and The Lancet. The rejection rates are awfully high. So do not despair. It happens really to everybody. So try to understand why the article has been rejected. Look at the reviewer comments, be self-critical, and submit to another journal or resubmit to the same journal if there is a possibility for that. So here's a list of things that can lead to acceptance. It's also from one of our editors. So attention to details, check and double check your work, consider the reviewer comments. English must be as good as possible. Presentation is important. Take your time with the revision. Acknowledge those who have helped you. The article should be new, originally, and previously unpublished. Critically evaluate your own manuscript, and ethical rules must be obeyed. So now that we are talking about ethics, some more details about that. So we see more and more issues with ethics in publishing. So it can be fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. So fabrication is making up research data. Falsification is manipulating research data. So that can start very small by just removing some outliers in your research. So don't start on that. You always report what you have found. And plagiarism, that can take many forms, by just copying a sentence or copying complete paragraphs or figures from other publications. And of course, if you see a perfect sentence that you want to reuse, you can do that. But then make it clear that it is from another article. So say, for instance, Jones and Jones said that, and then in brackets, reuse that sentence. And then it's clear that's from another publication. And if you want to reuse figures from other publications, that's also fine, but always be sure that you have permission to do that. So we'll also talk a little bit about conflicts of interest, author issues, duplicate publications, peer review publications, and sharing guidelines. So ethics, that's also a responsibility of the publishing house. So we do whatever we can to safeguard the quality and integrity of the content that we publish. So we want to have the best possible editors, the best possible reviewers, and we develop tools to detect plagiarism, etc. And we educate researchers and editors how to prevent unethical cases. Here you see a cross-check report, so all articles are automatically checked. Editors see these reports, and with these color codings, they can easily see from which a sentence has been, from which source the sentence has been copied. And if there is a lot of copying from only a few sources, then the article may be rejected. So conflicts of interest can take many sources, can take many forms. Can be direct financial, so employment, stock ownership, grants, patents, financial, career, intellectual or personal belief. So, your research may be, you may do drug research, and your research may be sponsored by a pharmaceutical company, or you may do environmental research and it is supported by an oil company. So if you think that there is a conflict of interest, the proper way to handle this is to be transparent about it. So disclose any potential conflicts of interest to the editor. So mention it in your letter to the editor, and then the editor will make an honest assessment if there is a problem. So authorship, so to be an author, that person must have substantially contributed to the conception and design or acquisition of data or data analysis, draft the article, revise it, and of course, very important, give approval for the final version to be published. Very often we hear from co-authors, hey, I'm on this article, but I haven't given permission to publish that. So be sure that authors have given approval for the publication. So all these three conditions must be fulfilled to be an author. And ghost authors and gift authors, what we talked about before, must be avoided. And then submissions, of course, double submissions must be avoided. So sometimes it happens that both submissions to different journals are accepted. And if that is detected later, then the articles may be retracted. We had one of the things, unethical things that we were confronted with last year is fake peer review. Authors suggested themselves with another email address as a reviewer. So they were invited by editors. Of course, they got very good peer review reports back, and the article was published. So a lot of articles had to be retracted by that from a Springer journal, over 100 papers. And that also happened to Elsevier, fortunately to a much lesser extent, to about, I think, 20 papers, but still this was a problem. So after your article has been published, what can you do with that? So with the pre-submission version of the article, you can do anything what you want. So that is the article before peer review. So you can do anything that you want. After acceptance, well, you can post it on a preprint server like Archive or Repack. But after publication, there are some more restrictions. Of course, if your article is called open access, it can be shared anytime, anywhere. But if your article is just a subscription article, you can use the so-called share link to share the research. And all articles can be shared freely after the embargo period. So all journals have an embargo period. So very often it's 12 or 24 months. And after that period, it can be shared with everybody. So of all published articles, authors get a share link. And using this link, they can send or they can send the share link to every researcher that they know and to friends and family. And using this link, these people that receive the link can access the article for free for 50 days. So basically the article is open access for 50 days. So that's a good service, I think. So even if the article is just subscription and not open access, you will be able to share it with people from all over the world. A little bit about reproducibility. Time is moving fast, so I will do this just very quickly. So, this is research from Nature already some years ago, but it was sent out to a lot of researchers and to 1,600 researchers almost. And they said that there was a reproducibility crisis. So a lot of people were not able to reproduce an experiment, not only from others, but also their own experiments. So, what leads to irreproducible research? So selective reporting, pressure to publish, low statistical power and poor analysis, fraud, insufficient peer review, etc. So, the cornerstone of scientific research is this one part of research can inspire other people, can also advance other research. So it is very important to do, these blue bars on the right. So better understanding of statistics, better mentoring and supervision. So there is a job for the professors there, more robust design of the experiments, better teaching, but also, there's a job for us doing better peer review. So this whole all these steps that we discussed. So preserve and store information, making information accessible, discoverable, and citable, make them trusted, so peer-reviewed, reproducible, reusable, that all lead to the top of this period to successful data that can really help to advance science. I don't have a lot of time left, but just a little bit about research communication. So how can you set up research collaboration, content promotion, open access, and social impact? So research is getting more global and more interdisciplinary, and setting up collaboration that can really inspire you and help you to advance your research, and especially when your early career, setting up a collaboration can be a useful turn to learn, to grow, and to get published. So how to set up a collaboration? So very often you can do that, well, in the past, before Corona, by going to conferences and meeting people. But now often conferences are, if they're not being organized in person, they're held virtually. And also in a virtual conference, you can interact with people, but also you can interact with people on social media, or you can do a search, for instance, in Scopus related to your own research and see who is doing similar research and try to contact these people. So what is interesting to note from Scopus, we see that international collaborations are cited much better than only local collaborations or only collaborations within a university. So also for the quality of research, international collaborations are better. And here are some guidelines for collaboration. So have patience, make it formal. So set up guidelines, agree on the deliverables, be responsible, uh, have a division of responsibility, and follow the schedule. So promoting your research. So after your article is published, it's important to, of course, articles are published for us on Science Direct, and you saw that it has 1 billion downloads, so there's a huge audience there, and it's also on Scopus and other indexing services. But you can also, in addition to that, share your research on social networks, for instance, scholarly collaboration networks on Mendeley. You can choose to have your article open access. You can use the share links that I talk about it. You can go to how can I share it with some guidelines, and you can make a lay summary so that your article may be used in non-scientific news outlets. Then open access. Well, there are two types of open access, gold open access and green open access. So with gold open access, the final version of the article is available to everybody in the world immediately. The cost of publishing open access is paid by a funding body or the author. Green open access is that the article is available in a preprint server or available after the embargo period. So Elsevier has about 300 fully gold open access journals and 1900 hybrid journals, so articles that publish both subscription and open access. So the APC, the article publication charges range from $150 to $6,000. So that depends on the quality of the journal. So for instance, for Cell or the Lancet, I believe you have to pay $5,000 or $6,000 to make your article open access. So we have are also other things related to open access. So I'll just skip this. So this is an overview of the global funding perspective. So mainly in Europe, they will go for gold open access. In a lot of other countries, until now, they go for green open access. So related to COVID-19, Elsevier has set up a novel coronavirus resource center, and there are also quite a number of articles relate to chemistry on there. So, also in drug discovery and in colloids, etc., there are COVID-related articles. So all the corona-related articles that we receive from all our journals, they are automatically tagged, they are given priority in the publication process, and they are made automatically open access for free. So in this way, Elsevier is trying to help just a little bit to try to solve the corona crisis. So all these articles are available for free. There are now more than 30,000 articles. We also give free access to researchers in clinical, biomedical, and life sciences related to COVID, free access to all our analysis tools. So these are the last slides. So if you want to know more about, research preparation, writing for research, publication process, navigation to peer review, etc., you can go to our Researcher Academy. So just go to Elsevier Researcher Academy and you find a huge amount of information written by experts in the field. you know, expert editors or publishers. You know, there are modules that I think in total 160 modules that can really help you to get published and to share your research or to set up a collaboration, for instance. So we've seen that about 45% of the people who use that are PhDs or postdocs, 30% are master students, 25% others. So yeah, here you see what we have there. So modules on funding, research collaborations, technical writing skills, ethics, etc., etc. So here you can find further information. researcheracademy.elsevier.com. So that's it, what I had to say. Thank you very much for your attention. I see that there are already quite some questions, 42. So we will try to answer that in the next section. And I will now stop sharing and hand it over back to Nicholas. And I hope that Henk Buscher is also there. Ah, there I see Henk. Hello, Henk. Very good to see you.
I am here and I attended your last 15 minutes, Rob.
Okay, very good that you're there, Henk. So we already did a short introduction to you in the beginning. So to your work as a researcher, but also to your work as editor for College and Services B biointerfaces, almost 30 years of editorships, and you handle about 400, 500 articles per year. So so here's a person with a wealth of experience in handling articles, and I'm absolutely convinced that Professor Buscher can give valuable guidelines of preparing a good article. So I think, Nicholas, we can now hand over. Do you have a presentation, Henk, or do you just?
I have my PowerPoint here and I can press share screen anytime, which is what I believe I should do, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, well, the floor is now over to you, Henk.
Let me try.
Thank you, Henk.
So do you see my screen now?
Yes, I can see it, Henk. Thank you. Go ahead.
And this is the way for me to continue?
Yes, maybe you can make it in the presentation mode. So
yes,
full screen. Okay,
better?
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, as you can all hear, I'm not very experienced in giving video conferences. This is actually the first time I do it because I have no idea whether I can bring up my initial enthusiasm that I always have talking to a screen, but we will try. Rob and I gave various presentations together and we actually shared slides, and the part that I attended that Rob was giving, I already noticed that there is a little bit of overlap in slides, but it will be a different presentation. Actually, I'll be talking about what I expect from a reviewing process. And it is part of a science writing course that I'm giving. I've given it all over the world. I still give it quite a lot. So it's a minor part of the science writing course. I don't know what they all told you about me. I'm born in 1955, so I have a long experience in science. I work at the University of Groningen and the University Medical Center, and actually I'm a physicist by training, and I have been working for College and Services B since its foundation. Apart from that, I also founded the Kolf Institute for Biomedical Engineering and Materials Science at the University Center in Groningen. And Kolf was a very special man, and I also like to take this opportunity to introduce to you this guy, Willem Kolf, because Willem Kolf was one of the most successful translators of new ideas to clinical practice. And you see here him standing here at the age of 85 years old, next to his invention that is saving millions of lives every day. That is the artificial kidney. This was the first prototype of what we now have as artificial kidneys or kidney dialysis machines. And the special thing about Willem Kolff was that he was a very simple thinking man. And this is the first concept of the total artificial heart, because he had many dreams. And the thing is, he made all his dreams come true into clinical application. And basically, whatever I want to tell the young people in the audience, you should always believe in your dreams in the same way that Kolff did, because this being the first prototype, this is what resulted from Kolff's dreams. Now, I believe that you should always believe in your papers in the same way that Kolff believed in his dreams. And that may not always be easy to believe in your papers, because you will suffer rejections, you will suffer disappointments. I've seen many of my students in tears. I have seen them in anger. I have seen students who wish to kill an editor or kill a reviewer. And publishing papers gives a lot of emotions. But I want to comfort you a little bit by telling you, you are not unique, and everybody has suffered rejection. Here you see a job application by Albert Einstein, one of the most famous scientists in the world, and he was rejected for a job by the University of Bern because they found that his work was somewhat radical, and his assumptions in this work were far too artistic for actual physics. So what I advise to you, if you have a paper and you believe in your work, continue believing in your work despite all these rejections. Now, this stupid peer reviewing process, which we sometimes hate as authors, is absolutely needed, because modern science builds on peer review. It improves the quality of the literature. It ensures acknowledgement to previous work. It determines the importance of findings, and it assesses originality and ethics. It's absolutely important. Now, here is the scheme, and I took this from Rob, and I'm not sure whether he showed it. I'm working here as an editor, so I do everything that comes before the reviewing. Basically, I'm completely in charge of your manuscript, because I decide whether I'm going to take it into account or not. I decide whether it's going to send out for review or not, and I decide whether eventually I'm pleased with the reviewer's comments and accept your manuscript or still reject it. So I'm here, and you as a potential reviewer are here, but we are both essential to the process. Although we also must realize that peer review has not always been an accepted standard. And here is our famous Albert Einstein again. And he was angry with the editor because he had sent a manuscript to the editor, and the editor sent it out for review. And Einstein said, I never allowed you to do that. I want my manuscript back, and I will send it elsewhere. Peer review has not always been the accepted standard, and it is a flawed system in a way as well. But we don't have any alternatives. So reviewing is a must. It is not something that you should do. It is something that you must do. And there are a lot of things in this world that you must do or must not do. And the big difference is between should and must is that you don't have a choice. If you should, you still have a choice. If you participate in science, you have to participate in reviewing. Simply because if you don't, the system collapses. And let me illustrate that. If you were a real audience, I would ask you to raise your hands. How many papers do you submit a year? And how many papers do you actually review? It's a very simple thing. If you would submit 10 papers a year, which you will probably not as a PhD student, but as a supervisor you would, you put on average, let's say 4 reviewers to work for your paper. You put 1 editor to work. So for your paper, you put 5 other people to work. That means that you have the obligation, in my opinion, to review at least 50 papers a year, simply because you submit 5. If you don't, the system collapses. And the system is already collapsing because it is very important to find good reviewers. And I want to make a point that why some journals actually invite more than 3 or 5 reviewers to reach a decision. It's an overheated system. And do we really need more than 2 rounds of reviewing to reach a decision, or should an editor take his responsibility? And is it really necessary that all reviewers are always unanimous before an editor accepts a manuscript? Well, these are a few thoughts mainly meant to explain to you that reviewing is very important. So I'm an editor since 1992. And basically what all editors want, and what we want as well, we want to increase the journal's impact factor. Now, what is the important thing to do if you want to increase your impact factor? Basically, it is the triage system and reject. The more you reject till a certain limit, usually your impact factor goes up. And that's very different than when I started in science, because when I started in science, improving a paper was part of the review process, an important part, an important goal, the only goal actually. But there were less papers, and reviewers could spend like half a day on reviewing a single paper. I receive for other journals at least 5 to 10 requests every week. So my reviews are not the same quality as the ones that I received in the beginning of my career. But triage and reject are very important things for an editor. Now, what did we actually do as editors? First of all, we got rid of what I call the oh my God papers. Now, what are oh my God papers? Oh my God papers are, first of all, very, very long and have many, many, many tables and figures. And they are full of what I call ridiculous sentences that makes people fall asleep when they read it. The results of this study show data that indicate that journals' impact factors increase with increasing rejection rates of manuscripts by the editor. Now, why is this a ridiculous sentence that makes me fall asleep? Because this is enough. If you write, you need to be concise. Use few words. These words, half of the sentence, makes me fall asleep. And I always, when I write a paper myself, think about the famous Dutchman, Leo Vromen. And he was a very special scientist in our field, describing something that is called the Vromen effect. And at the same time, he was a very famous Dutch poet. And when he was very old already, one of the journalists said to him, Leo, why do you still write poems? Haven't you said it all? And then Leo gave a very good answer. He said, my goal, and that is the reason why I still write poems, is to say it all in one word. And if you write a manuscript, try to say it in one word. If you write a review, try to say it in as little words as possible. And actually on the internet, you can see a word game or a storytelling game. And it's called 6-word stories. And with very little words, you can say, you can have a very big impact. And actually with little words, with fewer words, you can have more impacts. For instance, here is a 6-word story. For sale, baby clothes. And you will say, what is this? Baby clothes for sale. It's not yet a story, but if you add 2 words, never worn, then all of a sudden it becomes a tragedy in 6 words. I will give you another example. Shoes are sold in pairs. Now, everybody knows that shoes are sold in pairs. So who on earth would go to a shoe store and ask for 1 shoe? A soldier might do that. So now it becomes again a tragedy in 6 words. So use less words. Check for these ridiculous sentences. Also, what I see an awful lot is that people write an introduction as a knowledge exhibition. It's particularly very often by PhD students that write their first paper. They want to show to the world that they know an awful lot. Well, that's a big mistake because, and this may be disappointing to you, nobody in this entire world is interested to know what you know. Your papers should not show what you know. Your papers should express what is the knowledge gap in this world. What are you going to teach the world that nobody knows, including yourself? So introductions that exhibit knowledge are not a good introduction. Lots of tables and figures, combined results in discussions. I also don't like it. The other big step that we took to improve our impact factor is enforce our identity as a journal. We adhere much more strictly to our aim and scope. Now I'm talking about editors. What is actually your biggest frustration as an author? My biggest frustration was rejection of my paper by Nature within 2 minutes. And the letter said, after careful reading and consideration. 2 minutes after I pushed submit in the automatic submission system, it was rejected already. That's a big frustration, but we all need to live with that. Now you can doubt whether the Nature editor actually read my entire paper. And I like you to think about the question whether an editor will read your entire paper. Actually, I would be very interested to see you as an audience raising your fingers, who would say yes, who would say no. Actually, I can tell you, for an editor, at least for me, it's impossible. Even if you only receive 400 or 500 manuscripts every year. And I know editors that receive 800. It's impossible. If you just calculate how many hours you got in a day, it's impossible. Now, how much time do you really believe that an editor should spend on a paper for taking a first decision? That's an ethical question almost. I can tell you that the publication system is completely overheated because every week I get so many manuscripts to deal with. If I lie to you a little bit, then it takes me 15 to 30 minutes max to take my first decision. That is my decision to reject your manuscripts or not. And do remember that every person tells you 7 lies on average every day. So this is my first lie of the day. Do you actually believe that I, as an editor, will understand all the papers that I handle? I will be very, very honest with you. I don't. I do not understand all the papers that I handle. I take an important decision on your paper without really understanding it, because we are very, very specialized in science. And basically we would need topic editors for every paper. So basically, if you think that, well, this guy sitting behind his computer is not a very clever man, yes, you're right. I'm not a very clever man, but I made it up to editor. The main conclusion of all of this is that initial decisions by editors, including myself, are largely intuitive. It's not based on rules, it's not based on anything, it's based on intuition. And here I come back to Einstein. The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is no more than a faithful servant. And the intuitive mind is forgotten. So when Einstein said this, I felt a little bit better. I learned to trust my intuition and not feel too bad about my intuition. And I also know that in most times where I did not follow my intuition as an editor, I made a mistake. So what, as an editor, do I look at? I look at cross-section analysis. Basically, I think I'm very easygoing on you. If I see less than 30% similarity between your work and other papers, for me, it's no problem. It's easy to get 30% similarity. If you score between 30 and 40% similarity, it needs sufficient novelty. If it's between 40 and 50%, it's critical in what? I'm relatively easygoing on plagiarism if it comes to materials and methods, because it's very difficult once you have a good description, or once you've read a good description of a method, to phrase it in words that are equally good. There's only so many ways in which you can phrase it. If you score more than 50%, you're rejected. Now, the funny thing actually about this is, and I think that's really funny, the moment that Elsevier introduced an automatic cross-check analysis, the percentage similarity in the papers decreased enormously. It used to be, I used to get papers with 40 to 50% similarity. Now, really, the majority of the papers have only 20 to 25% similarity. And that's amazing, because simply by introducing the system, we seem to have solved a lot of the problems. Now, what do I look at initially as an editor? Initially, I always look at, is it within the scope? And I'm amazed how many people don't even read the author's instructions of a journal. Our author instructions clearly indicate which the criteria are based on which we take our decision to take a paper into account. We are devoted to fundamental and applied research on colloid and interfacial phenomena. We are not a histology journal. We are not a microbiological journal. We have several keywords in our scope. So I look as an editor, is this paper, this manuscript within our scope? If not, I reject it. I also look at the title. Do I really understand what the paper will be about? It should be informative. It should appeal to a large group of readers. And if not, I reject your paper. Just to give you a single example of a title, this title would never pass my editorial desk, because really, I'm not a very clever guy. I have no idea what this paper is going to be about. This is a bad title, and I don't want to accept papers with bad titles. The other thing that I look at is the abstract. Actually, for me, the abstract is the most important criterion for judging whether I take your paper into account or not? Is it in line with the title? Does it indicate a general significance, or does it simply start, we measured blah, blah, blah? No, why is blah, blah, blah important? Why is it of general significance? Does it have an aim? Does your study have an aim? Does your abstract tell me your aim? Do you describe your results? Does your abstract have a conclusion? Do you place your conclusion in a broader perspective? And do you use all the words that you offer? If I get an abstract with 50 words, then I know it has been rejected by nature before. And I don't like to be second choice. I know Elsevier has the system, your paper, your choice, but I want you to spend a little effort on your paper before you send it to my journal. I don't want you to play pinball with journals. And these criteria are very, very simple. And if you read them, you will say, I know, of course I know. But you would be amazed by the number of abstracts that I get that do not meet these simple criteria. And then you are simply rejected by me as an editor. I also have a superficial look at the introduction. It should not be about what you know. It should identify knowledge gaps. It should explain the reason why we need that knowledge that your paper is providing. What will your paper yield to fill that gap? And your paper needs a clear aim. Now, a very bad aim that I always reject is to make an inventory of journals' rejection rates by editors. Or the aim of this study is to study journal rejection rates. If I see aims like this, it is research for the sake of doing research, and research should have a real aim. Now, a much better aim already is to find a relation between rejection rates and the impact factor of a journal. Find a relation refers to an intellectual process, a scientific process that may or may not reveal a mechanism. Bear in mind that also a review paper should have a higher aim than just to summarize the literature. Particularly in Corona times, this is very important, because I tell people more and more, use the literature as a research tool. So what do you want to establish with your research? Then people give me an aim. Then I ask them the question, do you really need to go to the laboratory and do the experiments yourself? Or would it be worthwhile to study the literature and based on the enormous body of knowledge that is out there, try to combine that knowledge in a different way so that you can answer your research question by writing a review paper. Review papers that have such a higher aim are much, much more preferred than review papers that say the aim of this study is to review. Now, materials and methods are very, very important, but as an editor, I do not look at the materials and methods, because that is typically a responsibility for the expert reviewer and not for an editor. Rob already showed this. Experiments are very difficult to reproduce nowadays, and that's really something where, as an editor, I need your help, because more and more papers actually suffer from poorly described materials and methods. When I discuss papers with my students after a while, and this happens in very high impact journals, throw away that paper, because we will never be able to repeat it. The materials and methods are just not good. In addition, I get more and more papers that suffer from ununderstandable English. And that's even worse, because it leaves reviewers and readers guessing about important details. If reviewers and readers have to guess about important details, that undermines the reliability of science. And it's very unfortunate that I see it also very often in review reports nowadays that say, Henk, this paper, and there's also always this box with confidential comments to the editor. I really couldn't understand all the details of this paper. So for that simple reason, it should not be published because it undermines the reliability of science. And as a reviewer, as an editor, as a scientist who reads papers, I can only agree with this statement because it is true. So we need really, if you are in a country that has a lot of difficulties writing understandable English, you should seek collaboration with a native speaker, or you should have a translation agency help you write your paper in understandable English, because it's important for the reliability of science. And science is something sacred. I also look at whether the results in discussion are combined. Personally, I do not like that at all, because usually authors that combine results and discussion, they have a lot of data and they have no idea what to do with them, or they have very little data and they put them in a big cloud of words and literature considerations. And that means that I cannot see what is new. What have you actually done? What are your own results? And I cannot really see how it fits in and forwards the field, which is typically what should be written in the discussion. Very important. And then I look at, is the manuscript a chain? Can I understand the relation between the title, between your abstract, between your aim, between your conclusion? It's all one big line. If I have the feeling that this line is missing, then it's very simple. Your paper is rejected. I also have a look very superficially at figures and tables. This is also very simple. I'm telling it to a lot of people now because I think this internet audience is the biggest audience ever. And still, I know that you will go home and not apply it because I get into talk very often, but please, please take this into account. Most readers only read an abstract and look at figures and tables. This is a page out of one of our papers. This is a figure. That means that most people only read this. And that means that what you should do, if you write a paper with a figure, cut the figure or the table out of the paper, and the reader should be able to get the feeling that he understands this without reading the entire page. I know it's frustrating, but for me as an editor, it's a very important criterion. I look at one or two of your figures. If I cannot understand them for 80% without reading the text, I reject as an editor your paper. It's simple as that. Now, if I'm still, after all these considerations, in doubt about the suitability of your paper for our journal, I look at the graphical abstract. I look at the highlights provided. If I'm still in doubt about the suitability for colloids and surfaces, I look at the references. Are the majority of the references to our competitor journals in the field? I purposely put this number 1. If that's the case, it's excellent. Or are there also references made to colloids and surfaces B? If that's the case, it's even better. What I'm trying to tell you as an author, be a bit of a politician. If you submit to any journal, get like 1 or 2 references to that journal. here it's an example. If I see that there's a paper submitted, if this is a paper that I would have had to judge, if I see that there's a submission to Elsevier, I see there's a submission, there's a reference to CallServe A, well, I get the feeling that this paper might indeed be suitable for CallServe B. If still in doubt, I consult the cover letter, but I never base my decision solely on a cover letter. Now, it may be different with Science and Nature that only take 2 minutes per decision. I also look, and this may sound silly, I also look quite heavily at the suggested reviewers. I want to see an international spread of authoritative and active reviewers. A paper that was submitted from the University Medical Center Groningen that only lists reviewers from the University Medical Center Groningen, that's bad. A paper by US authors with only US reviewers suggested, that is bad. Reviewers suggested without sufficient detail is bad. That's why we now do reviewer registration. This is what Rob discussed, I think, fake reviewers, retraction watch. This is what I want to see. And it's very charming, opposed reviewers. Sometimes people put down opposed reviewers. That's charming and honest. Why do I attach so much value on the quality of the reviewers that you suggest? Because a good paper is written by a good scientist. And if you read this, you will say, well, hey, that's stupid. But you don't know how many people are just so happy if they got 4 names. They plop 4 names on a piece of paper and say, Busker, these are my suggested reviewers, it's your problem. No, Busker thinks that a good paper is written by a good scientist. Busker's definition of a good scientist is a person that has an international network. If you don't have, or your supervisor, a good international network, you are not a good scientist. If you're not a good scientist, you cannot write a good paper. If you cannot write a good paper, your paper is rejected. So, the conclusion, a good scientist can thus suggest an international spread of good, interested scientists as potential reviewers. And actually, you can do it better than I can find them as an editor. Elsevier has a lot of tools, but you should have the network. So your reviewers should, by definition, be interested in reviewing your paper, because every scientist wants to review a paper in his or her field. I'm not interested in reviewing papers for journals that are on the sides of my interest or beyond my interest. But if it's a paper that is in my mainstream interest, I have to read it anyway, so why not review it? So if you cannot suggest me 4 people who are willing to review your paper, it's probably not a good paper. So you better pay attention to suggesting good reviewers. Now, what makes a good review? An objective, thorough, and comprehensive report. Well-founded comments and suggestions for authors. Constructive criticism. Clear recommendations. This is a funny one. Because for whatever reason, I get several, actually more than several, maybe quite a lot of review reports say, this paper should be rejected. And then in the introduction of the review say, this is a well-conducted, interesting study. That for me, as an editor, is the beginning of problems. Because if a review starts by saying this is a well-conducted, interesting study, and at the same time they say it's a reject, what do I do? Usually I reject. And then the authors start to argue and discuss, and basically I do not discuss. Because if I would discuss about all my rejections, it would be a daytime job, I can assure you. So there is usually very little discussion about my editorial decisions. And it would help a lot if reviewers make their recommendations clear. This is a reject because it is not a well-conducted study and it is not interesting. You cannot reject a well-conducted, interesting study. Timely submission of your review is also very important. If your review fulfills these requirements, it's an excellent review. And there you go. If it's your paper, you're taken into consideration or rejected. As an editor, I reject approximately 80% of the papers upon first submission. But once you are in the review process, I would say you have 80% chance of acceptance. And that's also important. Now, finally, editors, it's important to realize this. An editor, if I accept your paper, I do that in the anticipation that your paper will increase the journal's impact factor. And the journal's impact factor depends on the number of citations it collects in a given year. And we want that to be high. And maybe Rob already told it. Some journals have an author's impact factors. How many times is that author cited in a particular year? The author's impact factor is important because it shows how active you are as an author. And you may say, like, what does he mean? What does he mean? What I mean to say is that your job as an author does not end when a paper is accepted. In my laboratory, we used to have cakes when a paper was accepted. Oh, everybody was happy, excited, and we had cake. I said, this is wrong. Your paper is accepted. Now the real work begins. Because you must advertise your paper by all possible means. You can send out PDFs to other people with a polite letter. If you read somebody's work and he is not referring to your paper, you should travel and give talks if needed over the internet. You should give full references in abstracts and posters. You should take handouts to meetings. And very dubious, actually, on the dubious side, but it happens. When you review a paper, you are invited to make the review as an expert in the field. And if you notice that your work is neglected, I think personally, it's justified that you demand reference to your work. You are asked as an expert in the field. Now, this should never be without motivation. It should never be without a clear argument. And this should never be exaggerated. I get review reports where reviewers say, these 10 papers, 5 or 10 papers, should be referenced for acceptance. That's too much. Then you are probably dealing with a struggling scientist who needs citations to get promoted. But you also don't have to accept that your work is neglected. Now, if you do all these things, and if your paper has collected the first 10 citations, then it's time to bring cakes to the laboratory and celebrate. Acceptance is just the first step, and then your work starts. That will give a good impression to the editors. Is it a fun job to be an editor? Well, in 1992, I was very, very honored. Now, it feels like a duty to science, and science is sacred to me. And we all have that duty. Actually, sometimes I feel being an editor nowadays is a miserable job because of the increase in the number of papers that I receive and need to deal with. The increase in the number of really bad papers that I need to deal with. And the fact that authors are very, very demanding. And the number of bad papers is increasing because more and more universities, master students need a published paper for graduation. And very often these master student papers are not sufficiently mature to compete for space in a good journal. And then still they need the paper for time constraints. They submit to one journal after the other until they finally get what they call lucky. And this puts unnecessary pressure on an overheated publication system. It creates unreliable literature. And herewith, universities make editors responsible for the graduation of their students. I have literally received letters of angry people that say, because of you, my student cannot graduate, but I'm not responsible for that. And really, I think this is something that should stop. Now, finally, being an editor is actually being a big decision-making machine. This is how I feel, the great decision-making machine. And I know that as an editor, I'm not a very nice person. It's very rude to reject your paper without any review or explanation other than a standard letter and give you no opportunity for discussion. That's bad. It makes me feel bad. It makes me angry when it happens to me. But suppose I would be discussing with all corresponding authors whose papers I have received. So I'm going to apologize to you, my friends, as an editor. I am an editor. Somebody has to do it. If I wouldn't do it, somebody else would do it. And without editors, current science would collapse. So here is my take-home message. If you are asked to review a paper, and also if you write a paper yourself, try to realize how editors think, how editors work, what editors need in your review. And I like to thank you for all your future reviews. Thank you very much. And now I press stop share, I guess.
Thank you very much for this, Professor Buschke. This was actually very educational for us, and this is great. Thank you so much for sharing with us. It's approximately 6 o'clock right now, so we are overrunning just a little bit, but I would ask one question. Professor Buschke and Rob, would it be possible for you to spend approximately maybe about 15 minutes to take questions for the next few minutes? So I would like to confirm this before I proceed.
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
great.
that would be fine for me as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So in the meantime, for those of you who have been waiting very patiently and typing in the hundreds of questions that we are trying to answer, we won't answer them right now because I understand that it's 6 o'clock and there are some of you who may have to leave. So for those of you who would have to leave, let me wrap things up a bit first. Firstly, if you have any questions and if there's any feedback that you'd like to leave, please proceed to the following link on the SurveyMonkey, where you can snap a shot of the QR code and you can click on this SurveyMonkey link to go and leave your comments for us. I'll spend maybe 5 more seconds on this slide. For the next 5 seconds, and this question comes up very, very often, some of you were talking about certifications. For those of you who would like to get certificates for this session, please proceed to the following link where you can type in the tiny URL and please type in the workshop code of VHNERN, and then you can claim your certificate, and then you can also take the survey. I will spend 10 seconds on this. Okay, And in the next series that I would like to share with you, because I understood that there were many questions about collaborations, the next series in our workshop would be an expert series webinar on how to build productive research collaborations and communities in Southeast Asia, where we have speakers from Philippines and Thailand, Dr. Rowena, Professor Raymond Tan, and Professor Jet. If you'd like to register, please click on the following link or scan the QR code. I will give you about 10 seconds for this again. Okay, now back to the panel questions, and thank you so much, Professor Bushka and Rob, for spending extra time with us this sunny Tuesday afternoon. We have some questions that were typed out in the Q&A panel, and I would like to ask a couple of the first compound question first. How would we choose journals, Q1 journals in chemistry to publish in? And what are the latest trending research topics in chemistry?
Maybe I can start with the Q1 journals. I think there are lists of journals and the quarters in which they belong to. You can, for instance, also see that in Scopus. If a journal is a Q1 journal, Q2, etc. journal. Yeah, again, I said this before in my presentation. It is, of course, important to publish articles in journals that are most suited to your research, whether they are Q1 or Q2. That's the second question. I would say more importantly than a Q1 journal is a journal that's most suitable to you, most suitable to your article, to your research, and that may give you more citations than a Q1 journal. But if you really want to go for a Q1 journal, yeah, maybe go to Scopus, look for a certain research field, check the journals and to see if they are Q1, Q2 or whatever. And the latest research trends in chemistry. Yeah, I mentioned that very briefly in my presentation. What we see now is that the hottest research, very generally speaking, is related to energy, to nanoscience, and to cancer research. But that's, of course, very generally speaking, and that's what I took yesterday from an analysis that I did in Scopus and in Sci-Fel. But Henk may have also comments on this.
Yes, I like to say a couple of things. As an author, because we publish ourselves as well, we're still very active. I have 20-25 PhD students. And as an editor, what I notice is that there are many countries in the world where people follow trends. I think that the question was also inspired by what is the trend? What should I do to get in the high impact paper? What should I do to get citations? Well, many years ago, I was in Harvard and we talked about these things. And there was one guy that said, I always tell my PhD students not to study the literature, not to follow the trends. Because if you let yourself being led by the trends, the chances that your paper has any innovative power will be low, because it's very, very, very crowded at the top. You can read too few papers, you can read too many papers. You should read just enough papers to maintain your own creativity, because your own unique creativity will lead you to the top. Following the trends will always make you a follower, never a leader. So that's my number one thing about this trend thing, which I personally really started to hate. The other thing is about selecting a journal. I would look at the topic and at your own needs. My university at a given point in time said, if you don't publish in a Q1 journal, it doesn't count for your output. My dean once said, if you publish in Q3 and Q4 journals, we should have a public burning of all these Q4 papers that you submit every year. Deans come, deans go, rules change, but very often you're bound to your local rules of your university. I would always say obey them. The other thing that I like to mention is that rejection is not always bad. Sometimes you submit to a Q1 journal, you get a very good review report, but it's still rejected. Use it. Don't play pinball with your paper. If you get review reports, you should say hooray nowadays, because 80% is rejected by the editor. If you use the reviewer's reports, use them and submit to a higher impact journal. Because you can also use the reviewer's comments to improve your paper. And I always tell my PhD students after rejection, let's try to fall up. You can fall down, but let us try to fall up.
Thanks for this, Professor Buschke. I think these are very salient points that people don't always register, because rejection always hurts initially. And the question here would be, how do we take it constructively? And thank you for sharing your perspective on that. The next one I would have to ask is, how do we, and something that we have seen in today's session, how do we collaborate effectively? How do we effectively bring interdisciplinary insights into chemistry? And how do we identify collaborators from other disciplines?
Yes, I had some slides in my presentation about this. So I would like to refer to that. And I would also like to refer to Researcher Academy, where they have a special presentation, a special module about setting up collaborations. And yeah, I think collaborations are very important. You never work in isolation on one topic. There are always other people working on somehow related topics. So try to set up collaborations. First of all, it's a lot of fun to do international collaborations, to meet with people from different cultures. It will expand your knowledge about a certain topic. It will help science in that certain topic. And also in the publications, what we see, for instance, in Scopus and Sci-Fal in our analysis tools, is that these international collaborations are in general cited better than only local collaborations. Yeah, and about setting up collaborations, yeah, normally people do that in conferences. So meeting people in person, that's now not possible. Try to do that in virtual conferences or otherwise social media. And what is perhaps, I don't know if there are people who are having access to Sci-Fal, but that's one of the tools that we can use to set up multidisciplinary collaborations. You see in an institute where the work is done, for instance, in chemistry, and you can relate it, for instance, to medical sciences, and to see where you can meet in the middle in a certain multidisciplinary subject area and see which people are working on these areas.
I like to add a little bit. I think that the biggest mistake you can make by looking for collaborators is that if you share enthusiasm about exactly the same things, If people come to my laboratory and say, oh, you have an atomic force microscope, you have an XPS machine, you do contact angles, you did this, and we do all the same. That is a reason not to collaborate. Because you have exactly the same expertise. So I would say, look for people with the same interest, but a different expertise. That's where you can find the most effective collaborations. And I don't know where the greater majority of the audience comes from. I collaborate a lot with China. I have a lot of fun in China. And basically, I think my contributions to those collaborations are twofold. Scientific, because I work a lot with chemists and I'm a physicist. And I know that chemists are different people. I'm amazed with what they can do and make. I cannot make anything because I'm a physicist. So I work with the chemist. My contribution is the physics and the microbiology. My other contribution is the language. And that could also be a good reason to collaborate. And we see it more and more from different countries where English is, science writing is a problem. Seek collaboration. But seek collaboration with people that can do something that you cannot do. Language-wise, scientifically, everything is fine. But don't look for people with the same expertise.
Thanks for that. Those are actually very good points, Rob and Professor Buschke. So I think we can field one last question, and this is a question that has come up very often right now. Rob, you covered this very briefly earlier in your session. So one thing I would want to bring up is, what are the factors which authors should consider when they want to publish in a Go Open Access journal or in a subscription journal? Does open access or non-open access affect the citation count of the research papers? And the most important thing would be, what's the deciding factor to publish in either of these journals?
It's for you, Rob, not for me.
Okay, thank you very much. So, yeah, deciding factors for publishing open access. I think that's mainly caused by any funding bodies or the universities or the country where you're in. Some countries require researchers to publish open access. Sometimes if your research is funded by a certain funding body, they also require it to publish open access. It really depends on the funding and the country and the institute where you're in. If you're looking at if you're looking at the exposure of an article, of course, open access articles are downloaded. You can download them for free. You can access them for free. So what we do see is that in general, open access articles are downloaded much more than subscription articles. Although if you look at the subscriptions, an enormous amount of researchers have access to our online content in Science Direct. I think it's well over 80% of the researchers around the world. They have somehow access to our content, either direct by subscriptions or by interlibrary loans. But anyway, if you publish open access, the articles are downloaded much more. But the difference in number of citations is much smaller. The open access articles are cited more, but that's only marginally. So it's certainly not the case that open access articles are cited twice as much or 3 times as much as normal subscription articles. So the margin is more that it is cited like 1.3 times, 1.4 times as much as subscription articles. So for the citations, you don't have to do it. So I would mainly look at the requirements from your funding body, the requirements from your institute, the requirements from your institute. One thing that you could also look at, if you are doing research in a low income country, you saw the Research for Life. So there are countries that get free access to our country, to our content, if people are in low income countries. But the same goes for open access. If you are in a very low income country, you can probably, or there is a possibility that you can publish open access for free. So check that out in our open access platform on Science Direct. So maybe you can publish open access free.
Thanks for this, Rob. So with this, about 15, I would like to thank everyone for today's session. Thank you so much, Rob, for making this happen. Thank you so much for this, Professor Buschke. Your insights were really good, and I think it's fair enough for me to say on behalf of everyone that everyone found today's session very illuminating and very educational. So thank you so much for this once again, everyone. We had approximately about 1,700 people in today's session. I think it was a very good, active crowd. Unfortunately, we were not able to answer everyone's questions, but I hope you found this enjoyable. Without further ado, thank you so much. Please be safe. Do stay healthy. We'll see you soon in real life, in real person, once this pandemic is over. So thank you so much.
Thanks very much for organizing this, Nick, and thanks for joining us, Henk Buschke. I really appreciate it.
It was a great pleasure. I didn't look forward to it, talking to a computer screen, but now that it's done, I must say I enjoyed it. So thank you very much for teaching me something.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nicholas, and thanks, Henk, and take care.
Thank you, everyone. Do take care.
Take care, everybody.